All right, we're back with the 1440, and we've got some runtime on it. Now, last week we showed some of the electrical stuff we went through just to make it more reliable. I think we've got about 6.5, almost 7 hours on it. Changed the oil in the Vanguard when we got it, and I wanted to go over some of the things to look for on these Vanguard engines. Now, I happen to really like the Vanguard engines. I think they're fantastic motors, especially the older ones like this one that were uh, manufactured in Japan. So this is like a 92, I think. Look over on the spec plate here. 93. And this is a 2900 series. So this is the 14 horse Vanguard. And this one's definitely been run hard. It's got a 48-inch deck behind it. And these are like the high vacuum decks. So they have some better blade tip speed and they cut really nice, but they do consume a little bit more power. So for the 14 to be pushing this guy for 20 some years is geez, I mean more than that, like 30 some years almost, is quite a feat, right? So it's tired, and the reason that I know that it's tired is I can kind of smell a little bit of exhaust smoke. I know it's not burning as clean as it could. But rather than just going off of intuition and feel, I wanted to show a couple things that make it pretty obvious that the Vanguards are on their way to needing a rebuild. The first thing is externally what's going on with the engine as far as oil leaks go. They leak just about everywhere once they get to a certain hour, and or once they get past a certain wear point. And typically what they'll do is they'll soil the air cleaner. So you'll get blow by through this tube, and then this tube here usually cracks down at the bottom there. We've replaced the tube on this one, so now that tube extends back underneath here. The old one was broken. There's a right angle part of that tube that comes into there. It was snapped off. We replaced that so it doesn't leak, on top of that breather assembly anymore, and then doesn't soil the top of the engine. But it instead redirects any of those blow-by fumes into the air cleaner. So they have blow-by issues. They're kind of picky about oil level. They don't like to be too high, or they start puking. They're just really, really sensitive about crankcase pressure. And any sort of external leak that changes the volume of air inside the engine will drastically change how much blow-by you get on these things. So oil level, you got to keep an eye on oil level. Definitely don't overfill them, and keep an eye on external leaks that can be fixed. There's a lot of seals and stuff. You've got your oil fill cap here. You've got a gasket underneath the dipstick there. There's a governor shaft seal down in there. Valve cover gaskets. A lot of these never really have had the valves adjusted. They're a manual lash engine, manual lash adjusters. So unlike the commands, these guys have routine maintenance that needs to be done to the valve train, which is typically never done. And if it's done, or if these valve covers have been taken off, typically people won't they won't replace the valve cover gasket. They'll just slap it back together. And then so any leaks around here ends up meaning not just oil coming out, but air going in. And any air going in is a no bueno situation. This one here looks like it's probably been apart before. There's some weird blue stuff right there. I think these valve covers have probably been off. They leak sometimes from this front or rear, the rear cover or the closure plate. This side's pretty dry. It's not too bad. They are bad about crank seals, so we've got not a bad crank seal here, probably a marginal one in the back there, or in the front. I keep saying front and back because the Cub has the motor turned backwards, but down in here, if you're getting oil leaks down behind the flywheel there, that's definitely an indication. They start kind of just gushing oil. Head gaskets are another problem. Right here, this one has a closure plate leak from some seal. There's an oil galley seal right here that is probably leaking. It's not terrible, but it's there. I just wipe it up and clean it up every once in a while. And generally what you'll see is if you take this air cleaner off, it's probably the cleaner air cleaner base is probably covered in goo. Um, and you know, if you're picking up one of these engines, they typically will run just fine, but they just start puking oil everywhere. And then once they get oil on them, they get oil all over the cooling fins, and then they overheat, and then that's when the wear really, really accelerates. So because someone says, "Oh, it's a good running engine," which you know typically they do continue to run for quite some time, even though they're worn out. Um, you would expect if they start leaking on the outside, they're probably ready for just a re-ring at least, as long as the bores aren't all scratched up. So this guy here is probably going to get a full reseal and hopefully a hone and a re-ring, and we'll see what the pistons and everything look like once we pop it out of there. But it does run pretty well, and for a 14 horse, I tell you what, this thing barely struggles with that deck. I mean, I have to have the hydrostatic control lever all the way forward and have the deck under a pretty significant load to hear the RPMs bog. So, yeah, we checked compression over here too. We've got 160-ish on this side, and this is our low side over here. This is about 140-ish, which is an indication that this side is the weak one. And I did pull the plugs on this one and saw that there was some oil consumption on this side. So we're going to expect to rebuild this one, and typically, you know, 500 to 1,000 hours, depending on the maintenance. These guys are about ready. Fantastic little engines, very reliable, but keep an eye. I mean, it's just a quick visual. All you got to do is just look over the engine, see how gross and dirty everything is in here. Now this one's been cleaned up because I had the air cleaner cover off or the air cleaner base off, and I replaced that tube. But you know, if they look like they're gross on the outside, they're pretty much they're getting close to being ready to be um, taken care of. So yeah, don't just take the word of the previous owner saying that they're, you know, oh, it runs great. Well, yeah, how much oil does it use?